Thank you very much. We're going to continue. We're going to continue with the climate resilience plan administration. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take this one. I do want to introduce our guest that is with us that has helped us formulate this report. We've got from the Resilience Institute, Ms. Laura Lyons, Brooklyn Rushton, and Dr. Harry Penn. Council and committee, you'd remember that back in April, we provided you the completed risk assessment evaluation that we've done for the town of Hinton. That risk assessment identified several vulnerabilities that the town has or can experience. With the recent unfortunate happenings in Jasper, those are reminiscent of what could possibly happen in Hinton. We, of course, never wish for that day, but the reality is that we see that the climate is changing rapidly and we have to adapt. So that brings us to the next point tonight, that the Resilience Institute has partnered with the town to actually prepare that risk assessment. They've then further come back to us and said, we'd like to further partner with you by offering you $50,000 to get into the adaptation and the risk reduction aspect of the vulnerabilities that we've identified. Also to identify any gaps that there may be in terms of disaster preparedness. I want to stress, council and committee, that this is not a emissions plan such as looking at GHGs and then something that's going to sit on the shelf and trying to get from 10% to 25%. But if you look at other adaptability plans, you sometimes will see that the GHG and the emission aspects are part of it. But that comes because the community at the time has required that. The unique proposition that we have on the table is that the Resilience Institute has partnered with the Red Cross. And we know that the Red Cross is no stranger to this area, the regional program initiatives. However, this is the National Red Cross that is partnering and that is in part provided part of this $50,000. And so tonight we want to share with council that we have an opportunity to introduce both the adaptability side as well as the roots for resilience. Now, Roots for Resilience is basically where we go into the community and we bring together our community to learn what resources do we have, what capacity do we have. This is not to take over the Fire Smart initiative that we're working with and updating our plan that's about 8 years old, that's being updated as we speak. This is to complement, align, and to enhance that exercise. So once there is the Roots for Resilience is enforced and we start this program, we'll be working collectively with such stakeholders. I think the other part that would come out of this council is that it's going to give us a good lens and understanding that, you know, changing our infrastructure as we go forward, where we upgrade, improve, will be done with this lens of being resilient. Secondly, funding would come our way where we could have subsidies that will help us to implement things like, and just using an example, you know, sprinklers on each one's home. You could subsidize that to 20, 40, 50% of the cost. The other point to this is knowing the capacity of our local community. So to give an idea, the military may come in to help us, but they may not be here within the first 24 hours. So if we know our capacity, we could already mitigate quite a bit of what could take our town into a peril situation. This could also influence policy going forward. So what we have in front of us here is to get the adaptability process going. And then finally, I'll just stop there for questions, is that we will also look at one regional initiative. As you know, that our climate resiliency plan was a joint initiative when we had a municipal energy manager. We got that 80,000 grant. We developed that report, which was completed in April of 24. This would also help us now to work with Jasper or Edson to see what are some of the lessons that they've learned or are learning as they get back on their feet. We've learned a ton of lessons ourselves in the town of Hinton because we've been a recipient community twice now. So there's a lot that we can share with other communities, and this is all that will come out of this exercise as we go down this road over the next 24 months. The cost to the town is basically time in kind for having maybe administration available to answer questions, collect data, provide the data to the TRI group. And in subsequent years, there will likely be an ask as we try to bring the legs to this adaptability plan, meaning it could be, should we upgrade our infrastructure? What does that mean? And with a climate lens attached to it. So that's where the cost would come in for the town. At this point, I'd like to pause. If there's any questions for the team on screen, and Debbie and myself, we'd be happy to answer.
Council? Trevor?
Thank you. So what I'm understanding from this is the opportunities to our communities is knowing the risk that we're at currently right now, identifying and learning the strengths that we have, but also the weaknesses, basically. And I mean, ultimately wildfire is probably on high on the list, right? So, and so that this report, this $50,000, and then of course in kind, is what's gonna bring to our community for planning into the future. You know, because does it identify, say, for example, risk areas of our community where if we want to, you know, put our resources to that area because this corner of the town is most at risk. Is that what we're looking at with this type of report?
Through to the chair, to Councillor Haas, that in part it would be correct. As you know, that our fire chief at one time shared with us that you are doing the 3-year application to help us mitigate, and with the emphasis on mitigation. So to your point, the 3-year will address that. We will complement this in terms of support resources, meaning, okay, if we re-enter our town, what would be some of the things that you'd need to get back on our feet quicker and faster than our neighbors possibly could have, because we've done some upfront preparatory work.
And if I may, just one follow-up. Okay. So what I also heard you say is the opportunities with learning this, then what it offers then mitigation, say grants or something, like you said, for sprinklers of homes to subsidize or something. So then knowing that information would put us in a better position to apply for different grants or different financial subsidizing opportunities. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm sure through the chair, that would be correct. Yep.
Thank you.
My question would just be to clarify, you said this is about climate adaptation, not about greenhouse gas reductions. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else with a question? Okay, my next question would be, practically speaking, how would this complement, say, a fire smart plan?
So not being a fire expert, and I'm going to leave this to the fire expert across on the table. So they would identify your vulnerable areas or where we should be doing, you know, fire smart activities, such as working from the highway, cleaning areas like we've done already around this area. What we would be doing is that we would be complementing what they are doing, and then we would be providing sort of what resources would be required, the timing, and what specialty forces do we need. For example, all our equipment that we have in town, the contractors may own. Could that be put to use earlier in intervention opportunities when we have a fire looming? Should we be evacuating people? What is the process that we should be using? Should we go east or west in conjunction with our fire experts? So that's what this would do in part.
Okay, thank you. Trevor, please.
Yeah, I guess this is a question for our guests online. Where have you done something like this before, and what are the results that that community has benefited from it?
Hi, I'm Laura, and I'll answer. Thank you so much for having us here. Joining you today actually from Treaty 7 and home of Métis number 3 in Canmore. So familiar to mountain communities for sure. And Harry's in Halifax and Brooklyn is in Jasper. So I'll respond to that. It's a great question. We are a national charity, so we work across Canada in different communities. We've worked with many municipalities, small municipalities and Indigenous communities. But this particular program and the way we're working is new. So we have done adaptation work. We have done implementation of adaptation work. What's new about this program, and I think really important, is that through the years, as we've been doing this work, we've also been contracted, I guess, so to speak, as a charity by the Red Cross to come in and do work that they don't do. And we had many, many conversations with them about how we are it's like disaster after disaster, and we need to do more to prevent. We need to get there before the fire and help communities. what we've been seeing is there's this pattern of siloing approaches. And communities have been planning, they do land plans, they do infrastructure plans, they do disaster plans, which is funded completely separate, usually from like public safety or from a whole different pot. And then they do adaptation, which tends to be, depending on who the government is, depends on how much money is available for adaptation. But there's been a big push, as somebody had said on the greenhouse gas thing, there's been a push for that. So what we've seen is that we go in and we start planning and communities are like, well, we already kind of did this over here with our fire program, or we did this with our flooding, or we don't have this, and it's very disjointed. And this is not setting communities up, especially smaller communities that don't have a lot of capacity like a city might. It's not setting them up for success, to be resilient to disasters, especially when they're back to back in different kinds of disasters, whether that's a big windstorm or a flood or fire or flood fire kind of relationship. So the Red Cross and us, we started to have these conversations about a year and a half ago, and Brooklyn was there at the beginning of these, let's do things differently. How do we do this differently? Why don't we bring disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation approaches together, take the best out of these schools of thought and approaches, so to speak, and help communities, instead of duplicating efforts, build on where, so starting from where you're at, that's we say we meet communities where they're at, and then we build from there with both these approaches. So in a way, Hinton will be one of the first to do this because nobody's done it. Some people are doing it in BC, some communities, because the BC government's investing in this kind of approach. There's been approaches like this in other parts of the world, but not in Canada. So you will be a bit of a guinea pig, honestly, but I think that taking this approach is going to be more time effective, cost effective, and put you in a position of being a lot more resilient than if you did things separately. So I hope that answers your question and maybe some others.
Okay, any more questions from council? Otherwise, I'd be looking for perhaps a motion. Covered.
Yeah, I'd like to make the recommended motion that committee seek consensus that administration brings back the climate resiliency plan report to a future meeting of council as discussed. And if I can quickly speak to it, I appreciate the answer, and candidness that this is a new initiative. However, we've had some obviously disasters over the years in various different communities, learned probably obviously from those that this is a best steps moving forward is to analyze your community, to set you up, because it's not necessarily it's one to mitigate the risk, but it's also what I'm hearing is if something does happen to our community, we're mitigating risk, but we're also planning for the reestablishing things afterwards, which I'm sure the Jasper and every other place that felt that growing pain. So I think that, with that and the fact that, a $50,000 to help us understand that for our community with the in-kind from administration, I think it just benefits our community, and it's what our community also has really asking for, is to make sure how safe are we from disasters, and this is a better we're better equipped to answer that question. So, and I appreciate bringing everything together. It's not just fire, but it's all departments. So that's why I'm looking for consensus. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions from council?
Mr. Chair, just Laura's got.
Oh, please go ahead.
I don't know how to raise my hand on this thing because I'm on Teams usually. I just wanted to add a point. So there is a cash component of this that we have been able to secure that would go towards implementing an action, which is great. But the actual value, which is a little bit hard for me to quantify, is like all of our time is covered, our travel is covered. We have a network from the Canadian Red Cross of their time and programs. So as we start to work together over the next 2 years or so, and unpacking like what are the gaps, what do you need, what does the plan look like, there's actually a lot of services that come under the umbrella of Roots for Resilience. So I'd say your value, and we'll be able to figure out what this is. We'll be able to quantify it better, is a lot more than just that. So I think it'll be good to work together on this, and then to be able to come back to council and say, okay, over the last year or 6 months, here's what we did for you, and then we can figure out what that true value is. And hopefully you won't have a big fire or a flood before we get really working on stuff. Oh my goodness.
Well, my question would be, does this commit us in any way to providing funds in the future? Okay, I saw her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what that means. Thank you. Right. So any more questions or comments? With that, could we move to the census, please? Okay. That committee seeks consensus that administration brings back the climate resilience plan report to future meeting of council as discussed. Please vote for or against. Thank you. Okay, it's unanimous. We move forward. Thank you very much, climate resilience folks, for taking the time to answer our questions and for showing up. We appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to move on to short-term rental bylaw amendment 1162-1.
Thank you, Chair. I will turn this over to Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Chair and rest of the committee. Yes, so stemming back from the August 27th council meeting, it was a committee meeting. Council had made a couple amendments to put forward to amend the short-term rental bylaw. The two key amendments would be to cap the non-principal residents, which are the non-primary residences, to 100 units, as well as allowing external secondary suites to be eligible to operate with a short-term rental unit. So with that, the report explains those amendments, and at the time when we had the report go to council on August 27th, CAO had met with a company that was one of the motions that we're going to be looking at obtaining them in future in 2025 if council supports the budget. A company called Brown-Test, which is a host compliance software company. They do a lot of work for governments, different government agencies and municipalities and whatnot. And they manage a software that can actually identify addresses and areas where the short-term rentals are, among other things. So they had ran a scan for CAO before that meeting, just to kind of see where we're hitting on the map right now. So at that time with the scan, they did find that there were about 107 non-principal residents that were on the market that were not licensed. Right now, we only have about 24 that are licensed, and we do have them listed on our County Hinton webpage on our short-term rental page. So that was what they kind of found, just scanning the community, because it's hard for, as you guys know, to find out where those addresses are if there's not external photos, and you need to book the actual you need to book the Airbnb to find out, to learn where the actual address is. So it makes it difficult sometimes for men to be able to find these unless we hear them through word of mouth or complaints, and that sort of thing. So with that, you'll see attached to your agenda was amendments made to the actual short-term rental bylaw to include updating the short-term rental definition to include external secondary suites. We know that there already are a few in town. That was something we missed in our first go around for the original short-term rental bylaw. We do have people that are renting their external secondary suites in their garage for instance, as a short-term rental, which is fine. Well, it wasn't fine because we're gonna make it fine with the amendment. However, they're doing it as long as it's one or the other. You can't have both, just like in your home. If you have a secondary suite in your home, it's either that or you can have it as a short-term rental. So it can be either or, it can't run as both, like, I mean, it's up to you if you want to long-term rental it out and then you want to short-term it in the summer months, but you still have to get your license for your calendar year. We don't just segregate, oh, short-term rentals, we'll license them from May to August, just because that's when people want to run them, right? That would be an administrative nightmare to try to track and manage. So, so the bylaw describes that it's either or, not in combination of both. As well, we put in here the amendment for the cap to 100. At the time, it was talked about after CEO had brought forward the housing policy, and that discussion came about from that, deciding on, well, what can we do to find a balance? We want to still be allowing them because they are a good economic drive for our community. They do help people with paying their mortgages and whatnot like that. And we know that we can't segregate who can buy a property in town. We can't say just only locals can buy a property in town and run an Airbnb. We can't, that's against the law. So basically, if people are coming from out of town and they're buying up properties, they can. They just need to ensure that they have a property manager that is registered with us when they do obtain their license from the town of Hinton, if they get their license, hopefully. And then we removed the grace period because that was the intent of the very original bylaw when we first brought it into fruition. Of course, we're not offering that grace period for this purpose. And also you will notice that we are referencing the new fees, rates and charges bylaw. And you'll see that with the other reports as well, because what we're doing is we're removing, as we come to council, we're removing any bylaws that have schedule of fees in them. And we're going to be taking them out of general bylaws and putting them into a master fees and charges bylaw, which Charlene will be bringing forward to you guys soon. Anyway, so but we did attach that for you so you can see what that bylaw is going to look like, and that'll also come when we talk about the business license increase to the fines. That will show up in that new schedule of fees. Yeah, so I think all in all, we're here today, all of us, we've heard both sides of the coin. You know what the benefits are and the disadvantages. However, I think it's finding a middle ground, a balance where, we're not saying that short-term rentals are solely the only ones that are contributing to our shortage in housing stock, or that that it's making long-term rental rates increase. I mean, we know it's a factor, but it's really a global issue, and Hinton is unique in its own way. And so I think it's for us, council and administration, to find, okay, what does that balance look like? And as we heard today, maybe the 100, isn't, it's not favorable to some, to cap it. But I do know that if we were to cap it 100 or 125 or what have you, we always have the opportunity to review that bylaw again. So if, say we decide, oh, we're gonna cap it at 100, all of a sudden we get an influx, which is what we want. This might help people to come to the table and get their licenses. And if we find, okay, we have a wait list and there's like 30 by the very next day or something, like we have the option to come back to council and say, do we want to increase this cap? Because if, for whatever reasons at that time. So it's not that it's set in stone, just like our first bylaw, we have the opportunity to review and to, check check the community at the time and see what the pulse is and see what, you know, things are going on, and things have evolved and they have changed since we first implemented this bylaw. With that, I will leave it open to any more questions unless there's anything else you want to add to that. Yes,
Okay, questions or comments? Joanne, you were first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, do we call it non-primary or non-principal?
non-principal.
Non-principal.
Yeah.
I know other municipalities ask for a development permit. Do we ask for a development permit?
A development permit is required when they are having a short-term rental out of their dwelling. They require what we call a home-based development permit to operate that short-term rental from their dwelling. So they would require a development permit and a business license for the short-term rental. Whereas the non-primary, which same thing as non-principal residences, they only require a license, a business license. Because they are not living there and they're not operating business from their home. So it's a home-based business are things like, as you know, things like, oh, I want to have a hair salon in my house and I can do one client at a time, or I want to do consulting services, right? Those are what home occupations are. They're kind of like an incubation type thing for people that if they want to try out a new business and maybe they're just small and they need to grow, and maybe it's something that they just want to be able to write off some of their you know, their house bills and stuff in their taxes or whatever. They might want to just do crafts or what have you. So yes, they do require a development permit only though when you live in the home.
But could we request a development permit for a non-primary residence?
Well, it's not, it wouldn't work under our land use bylaw right now because that would be either for you're operating a business from the home. So it wouldn't, I don't believe it would fall under our home occupation regulations under the land use bylaw. I don't think we can do that.
Could we not change our LUB to reflect that?
That would need, I think we would need to get, I would need to do some research and maybe we would need to speak to legal on that. And if that is something, and I just don't see how, what would the permit be giving you? Do you know what I mean? Because the short-term rental is it's a license.
I just know
to
another
operate.
municipality that their LUB does reflect development permits for the non-primary.
That would be, if you could share that, that would be great.
Through the chair, you can do development permits. I don't think there would be anything that would be stopping you from doing that. But typically development permits are issued to make sure that whatever that development is gonna be compatible within the zoning. For us, and the way that our land use bylaw is structured, that we don't consider this as a different zoning, as a, say, a commercial business. This is still a residential use. It's just, we've regulated this through the licenses. You know, but if we are still deeming this compatible with, it is still residential, it is still compatible with the residential zoning, so you wouldn't necessarily need it. You know, you can certainly regulate that. We can certainly look at ways that you can regulate from a planning perspective. But, you know, I think we just need to ask if, you know, what is the intention of regulating it in that way? And we regulate a lot through this specific bylaw in similar ways that a development permit would. To make sure that the homeowners doing their due diligence, it's safe for occupancy, all of those things are governed through the bylaw, not necessarily our planning documents. You can do both or either one.
I'll find out why they've chosen to go that route. But when someone does apply for a development permit, does it go in the newspaper saying that this?
It
person
does,
wants to
because
do
all
this?
home occupations are considered what we call discretionary uses within each district, land use district. So they're automatically in the Voice newspaper.
So everybody reading the Voice would see that
Correct,
this is
and-
a non-primary.
Yes,
Right,
and
so-
on our website. No, that's
Oh.
principal residence.
Oh,
Home occupations are considered discretionary. Where we advertise the non-principal residence business licenses is on our short-term rental page on our Town of Hinton website. That's where that is. But anybody who's operating one from their home is considered discretionary, and that's where you would see it come in the Voice newspaper and as well on our website. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Albert?
Mr. Chair. Speaking to the secondary suite addition, I appreciate that. I did have a question, kind of high level, and I'll give some background information so you can bring the answer. In terms of what's allowed for secondary suites in our land use bylaw, I've heard of situations in communities where people have put like 6 secondary suites in their backyard and then rented them out as either short-term rentals or conventional rentals, which obviously puts a huge burden on the water, sewage, parking, all those systems. So can you explain how our secondary suite system would allow that?
Absolutely, yes, thank you, Chair, through the committee. Yes, it's within our land use bylaw. External secondary suites are specifically only allowed in certain districts. They are your RS1, which is your large lot district, your RS2, which is your standard lot district, and your acreage residential district, because those are your larger lots which can accommodate the accessory buildings as well as your primary building. So no, in those districts, you can only have a total of 3 dwelling units, I should say. So you can have your primary dwelling, which is your house. You're allowed an internal secondary suite within your home, and then you're allowed only one external secondary suite in your yard. So most people right now, of course, that's usually within a garage. And when we get to tiny homes tonight, you'll see that we're going to look at tiny homes as being allowed as secondary suites, external only. And they're gonna be subordinate to your principal building only, so they will not be on a standalone lot. And those will be able to be, they're little modular, they have a certain size, we'll get to that tonight, but they'll have a certain size that they have to be, and they don't require that they're in a garage, for instance. So that'll be coming later tonight. So that's your question? Okay, thanks.
Nicholas, please.
Thank you. And through the chair to committee, I have a couple of considerations that I'd like to put out there. We've done some public consultation on this item. We've had some good time to think about it. And as I think about this issue, I really look at it as a fire and life safety issue primarily. When I hear about the number of businesses operating short-term rentals in our community that are unlicensed, that means they have not gone through a fire inspection. They've had no one take a look at the property, and we have no idea what the safety is. The reality is commercial properties have building codes that require ingress and egress, emergency lighting, fire extinguishers, sprinklers, you name it. Hotels and commercial accommodations are designed for people to evacuate, even though they're unfamiliar with the structure and they're not accustomed to being there. Homes, residential homes, on the other hand, do not have the same building codes for fire and life safety. They're designed for ingress and egress of families and people who live there on the regular and familiar with the structure. And so having residential homes operating as businesses that are uninspected, period, uninspected, causes a fire and life safety issue. So I think that as we move this forward, we should be very aggressive on unlicensed bed and breakfasts and unlicensed short-term accommodations, because they do pose a real and true hazard within our community and to guests of our community. The other consideration that I've heard even tonight, and it's been mentioned by admin a couple of times, in our land use bylaw, we have provisions for home-based businesses, but a non-principal residence, Airbnb or short-term rental, is not a home-based business because it's not a home. It's strictly a business. And the reality is municipalities have land use planning powers because residential real estate is not as valuable as commercial real estate. Commercial real estate turns over cash flow and residential real estate simply does not. So what we are seeing with Airbnb operators or B&B operators, short-term rental operators in residential districts that are not zoned for commercial operations are operating straight up businesses. They're not living in the homes. They're not even attempting to live in the homes. We heard from a couple of owners earlier in this meeting that they're receiving 600 to 800 guests a year in a home that was designed for a family of five, or maybe a duplex is designed for two families of five. It's a substantial difference between a business and a residence in terms of water use, sewer use, road use, traffic, you name it. And I have a lot of concerns about 600 to 800 people showing up in a home that's unsafe and uninspected. I think that's a major liability for the community. And so I'd like to see us come down very aggressively on unlicensed operators. And quite frankly, I think that businesses in residential districts, if that's what we want to allow to happen, we should change our land use bylaw to accommodate that. So in terms of the cap, I would be okay with moving our cap down to what is currently licensed at the time of the bylaw passing, and not allowing any more non-principal residents short-term accommodations in residential districts that are not zoned for commercial operations. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, I'm not in favor of a cap at this point. One of the stated purposes for a cap was to decrease availability and affordability of housing. And I don't know that we have enough information to say that it's going to accomplish that. There are studies that indicate that it might, there are studies that indicate that it might not. There's experiences from the Okanagan where they did regulation in the spring. And they found a dramatic reduction in business in the community. And they didn't get a reduction in the rental rates. So the factors that affect the affordability of housing, those houses going on the market, is not something I think we know. And in Penticton, they had a community right beside them that didn't do the regulation because they didn't have to. And they didn't have a reduction in tourism like the town of Penticton did. So no, I don't believe we know enough and that the evidence is enough. And I think what we might actually do by putting in caps early, or maybe even having caps, is do more harm than we're doing good. These things are furthering us towards tourism in the community. They're going to bring in hundreds of dollars per night per unit. And it's one of the pillars of our economic growth into the future that we want to look at. And if we don't have well thought out and well designed reasons for why we're going to do this, the only ones I have are the ones that were presented during the last meeting on August 27th. And I don't think any of those reasons hold water for this type of regulation. I am in favor of inclusion of external suites as an eligible SDR. So I'm in favor of that. I think that's a good idea. Yeah. And I am in favor of business licenses and having these things for business licenses, much the same as the mayor did for the reasons that he provides. But I'm not in favor of a cap. So, Joanne. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in favor of a cap, and the reason my reasoning for that is it would be a different conversation if we were, say, capping commercial businesses. We don't cap various different things, and I'm not gonna say one business, you know, of any other, but this is different. This is in residential areas that communities thrive on having housing. And I appreciate those coming forward, but I'm not entirely sure how you can state that this is not affecting housing. I mean, what's to stop people? I just went online and currently right now in MLS, there are 42 homes for sale. What would stop a big company coming in and buying up 42 homes and making them all Airbnb? And then we have nothing for sale, zero. We would have whatever, you know, and I mean, we've already got, what I heard was a 50 that may not, if we capped it at 100, there's 50 that won't fit into that. My concern is this can be a slippery slope here, and if we don't stop it, I think that we risk, you know, people coming in. People keep saying developers will come. if we have tourism. I'm sorry, but I've just come back from the AMA or the Alberta Munis Conference, and all small communities are suffering exactly what we're suffering. Developers are not coming to our communities to build a home here or there. It's just not financially feasible. So and I think it's just recognizing this is just one strategy among others. I mean, I know they were talking about developing and people were talking about, we need to increase that. That's what administration is also working on to bring to council. So this was just one of three that I think, and the tiny homes is one of them, and initiatives. So I think as a council, it's our responsibility to look at our community, and these businesses in residential areas, you know, I think really do jeopardize the possibility of our housing market in our communities. So we already know that people have a hard time, you know, that are hiring to find homes that are affordable, that are reasonable. And this, I think, just is the responsible thing to do to cap it. Now, I'm not sure, I'd have to hear more about capping it at that 24 or whatever is that are licensed, but I agree with the mayor that many of these units that are unlicensed, I agree, are potentially a safe, life-threatening situation, because we don't know what their status is because they haven't gone through the proper permits or proper assessments. So that is very concerning, and the fact that those individuals have really just turned the nose up at the bylaw, the law. And I know one of the persons said, well, people didn't know about it. It's been over a year now, so if you didn't know about it, then you kept your head in the sand. So I'm in favor of caps. I'm in favor of all that is suggested here so far. So thank you.
Gordon?
Through the chair, just one point of clarification. The cap of 100, we expect that it would affect or it would prohibit about 28 units. You said it's 54. There's a total of 154 operating STRs, but that includes non-principal and principal. So we believe that we have about 128 operating non-principal residents.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I may as well, we do have some in the queue right now, that people have applied and paid. We're just got them in queue for getting their inspections completed. And so they're, you know, I think those ones would be grandfathered because they have paid. And again, January becomes the calendar year. So as long as the existing ones come in and they renew their license, they will be on that list. Those that are new, they can certainly apply, and then we would add them, any ones to the list that after the 100. I mean, again, we can review that at a later time too, if we feel that isn't fair.
Go on, please.
Do we have a motion on the floor?
No.
Nothing. So, no, I'm in agreement with what Councillor Haas is saying. My fear is, who's that company in the street? Blackstone, or there's some major corporations who are going in to communities, buying up the condos, buying up the duplexes, going in under the radar. And, you know, once they've bought up everything, it's an absolute shock to the community. So I'm fearful of that happening to us. I see what's happening in Canmore. You know, they've got over 770 short-term rentals. They made decisions years ago that are coming to haunt them today. So we really gotta be careful what we're doing today. I know that we can always revisit this and do it again, but this is important, and I gotta say, I'm kind of leaning towards what our mayor was saying, and I certainly hope he makes a motion in that direction. So, thank you.
Through the chair, I have struggled with this one back and forth for the last little while. There's definitely been a lot of variety in the input, both for and against this on all sides, which has been interesting to hear. And I would say that I agree with most of the comments, and I agree with the cap, but I do not support a cap that is not data informed. And I don't believe that 100 is based on It's just based on the number that we happen to get. We really can't say that, is this too much, is this too little, is 23, is 250, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know how you make that decision, but I'm not comfortable making a motion of picking a number, plucking a number out of the air and saying, this is what we think is best for a community based on. Would we have picked 50 if there was only 50 that came through in the scan? Would we have picked 300 if 300 was part of the scan? I don't think we've done the due diligence to say what that reasonable cap is. So I am in support of some type of cap. But I can't support a cap of 100 because I don't think we're making it based on facts.
Thank you, Trevor. Let me see who's next. No, Nicholas, sorry. Nicholas?
Thank you. And through the chair to committee, I would like to seek consensus that committee direct administration, I'm going to need a little help with the wording here, perhaps, to remove the cap of 100 licensed non-principal short-term rentals and replace it with wording that effectively prohibits any new non-principal short-term rentals in zones where short-term rentals are not permitted, and to bring back to committee or council a list of recommendations of residential zones that would be appropriate for the business use of short-term rentals, non-principal short-term rentals. And I'm thinking in our land use bylaw that we have a number of residential zones, and some of them already allow business use and some of them do not. And it's based mostly on density and lot size and location in our community. But I would look to end the practice of allowing businesses to operate on residential zoned parcels where the business case is not explicitly permitted in the land use bylaw. Thank you. How are we doing for wording there, actually? Secretary, maybe we can see it. I can fix it.
Administration worked that one out.
No,
That would require some research through the chair. So Charlene's working on it, but I believe it's to remove the cap of 100 and replace it with a clause that would say that there's no new short-term rentals in, sorry, that was non-permitted zones, or was that essentially at the date of passing of the bylaw?
So I'm looking to get no new non-principal residence approvals at the passing of the bylaw outside of residential zones that permit the short-term rental use. In addition, we need to bring back the land use bylaw with recommendations for some of the residential zones to have short-term rental use included.
Through the chair, okay, we can do that. I think it's the last part of that motion that I don't think is consistent with our current regulations, because no new short-term rentals in the zones that don't permit it, but essentially, you know, unless we're talking about some abnormalities in grandfather developments, I believe that all residential zones authorize short-term rentals. So there are no zones in our land use bylaw that would prevent this. So, but if we're looking at removing the cap and replacing that with the regulation that would state that there's no new no new non-principal short-term rentals at the passing of the bylaw. And then we're also looking at administration bringing forward recommendations on how to regulate this from a planning perspective. I think that would be a little bit more clear for administration.
Yeah, that would work for me from a planning perspective. But as I read our land use bylaw, it does mention short-term rentals, but it references our short-term rental bylaw. And in the permitted uses, most of our they list as accessory buildings, parks, public utilities, single detached dwelling, family care facilities, home occupation, those kinds of things. But home occupation is not a short-term rental on a non-principal residence. We've gone over that already. So I don't think our land use planning addresses non-principal short-term residences in actual fact. And I think that we could make non-principal short-term residences a discretionary or permitted use for some of these residential districts without changing the nature of the communities. And I think we should leave them off others because they're inappropriate in those communities. And that's the point of land use planning. Either way, we're working on the motion here. So do we have language that lines up with that sort of intent? I apologize for the awkward nature of this. Doing this online is tough.
Yes, they are, and it's quite dependent on how the wording this will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll wait for the wording.
Maybe this would be an appropriate time for a 5-minute break. No? We'll stay. Appropriate time for a stay.
Are we on a break?
No.
Oh, we're not.
No. Okay, can you see that, Nicholas?
I do not see it anywhere at the moment. No. There we go. Okay, screen share is starting.
The committee seeks the consensus of the administration to remove the cap of 1,100 non-principal residents and replace it with no new non-principal residences at the time of the passing of the bylaw. And that the administration bring back options on how to regulate short-term rentals from a planning perspective. Is that what you're comfortable with?
Thank you from the chair. If right where the cursor is, if we could add in non-primary residence short-term rentals. Or sorry, non-principal residence is. Okay, and then I think because of the second part, the first part, the committee seek consensus, the administration remove the cap of 100 non-principal residences. I think everything from and up to the next and can be removed. So I'd like it to read that committee seek consensus, the administration remove the cap of 100 non-principal residents and that administration bring back options on how to regulate non-principal short-term rentals from a planning perspective. And if I may speak to it, I'm curious to see what council thinks of this, but I think the cap at a random number is not a great option. I do think that we should be looking at this from a planning perspective. There are parts of our community that are appropriate for commercial operations, businesses, and there are segments of our community that are not appropriate for commercial operations. And I think doing that through the planning process, land use bylaw, is a more appropriate place than a cap in our short-term rental bylaw. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what council has to think about this.
Okay, Trevor, you were next. Albert, is there a question related to this? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So relating to the motion that's before us, I have concerns. I kind of, if we were gonna go this way, I kind of like the wording that, Mayor Nissen suggested earlier, which to my understanding was areas that are actually appropriate to be able to accommodate short-term rental and the impact that it brings. That I might have supported. This to me is too cumbersome, and I'm concerned that this may open a can of worms that haven't been considered, because the argument could potentially be made that conventional rentals are also could be owned by a business and also could be considered a business venture. And what would you do about permitting conventional rentals in those same neighborhoods? I absolutely do not support that. Conventional rentals are a required housing solution for a segment of our population who needs to live in a community because they work here and don't have the interest or the aptitude to be able to purchase housing here. They require rental housing, and it's not necessarily an apartment or a condo that they can get away with. They may need a house. I'm just concerned that moving with this is gonna be an administrative challenge, and it might open up a lot of things we're not considering right now. Thanks.
Joanne, you were next.
Thank you. What I would like council to consider is splitting that motion and dealing with, the first part and then dealing with the second part. So to have this motion split and to add to, the second part of this motion is to get comparables from other municipalities on what they're doing.
Would the mayor be agreeable to that?
Thank you, and from the chair to Councillor Ostashik's point, I am open to a friendly amendment of the wording here to match your intention. My intention is absolutely not to affect standard rentals of properties, and I don't believe that this would. We're specifically talking about non-principal short-term rentals, which are different from long-term rentals, which are completely permitted in our regular residential zoning bylaw as it stands today. But splitting this in two, I would agree with, or rewording it to better make council feel comfortable. I am in support of either. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important to get comparables from other municipalities. Number one, I'd like administration to hear what Canmore is proposing. And there are 5,000 people more than us, but I think they would be a comparable to us. So that's why I would like that into the second part of that motion.
I seek administration's guidance in giving your.
Through the chair.
There are two people that are okay with splitting it.
If it's a motion to split, this is committee's motion right now, so you can, I would vote to split the motion into two. And then deal with these issues separately, if that was the motion that was put forward.
Okay, so the motion we're dealing with, Joanne, would you like to put a motion forward to split this?
Oh, and what would I say? Just
Through the chair, I believe that this would be, that committee seek consensus to split the vote between removing the 100 limit cap and you'll have to wordsmith it a little bit, Charlene, and the planning considerations of that motion. Through the chair to members of the committee, I mean, this isn't, I have the there is a lot of ways that you can regulate short-term rentals from a planning perspective. They've done it a lot, especially in the States. I'm sure other jurisdictions in Alberta as well. But one of the things that you do is the residential zonings are the zonings that STRs are going to be eligible to be to go into. Council can take a look at all the characteristics of all the different zonings, and we separate them from different lot sizes. You know, council has the authority to decide which residential zonings are STRs allowed into. Alternatively, you know, kind of outside of the zoning process, they've looked at breaking, and this was a regulation through the actual bylaw itself, but they've actually broken down the communities into different zones, and they've imposed different caps in different zones. And those are, you know, for different reasons, but there's a few options out there of how you can do this from a planning perspective. We don't, as of right now, we don't regulate this from planning. We use it through the bylaw, we use it through a licensing system, and that's the extent of the regulations as of right now.
I think the thing we're looking at right now is John's motion, rather than discussing it, is John's motion to split this into two motions. The first one is to whether to take away the cap, and the second one was generally to get administration to bring back options for short-term rentals from a planning perspective. So we're looking at splitting those into two motions, and then we'll deal with each motion individually before we discuss it.
Yeah.
So are there any discussions related to that motion to split it? Albert?
Mr. Chair, I will support a motion to split. For me, those two are not mutually exclusive, and how I decide on one is reliant on what happens with the other one. So to me, they need to stay together, because I right now, I wouldn't support a motion to remove the 100 cap limit by itself. And I also wouldn't support a direction to administration to bring back options on how to regulate short-term rentals. If I could expound on that a little bit,
Sure,
Mr.
please.
Chair. My reasoning for this is I have not heard a huge amount of input from the community of concern about where short-term rentals are allowed and where they're not. If that was a concern that was coming forward from the community, I could say, okay, I understand. What I've been hearing is we can't have free reign on short-term rentals. People could come in and buy up every single property that's for sale and not allow anything to be left for the people who need to buy and live and conventional rent here. I think this is putting the cart before the horse. We don't even have a fully implemented bylaw in place yet that people are being held accountable to, and we're looking at modifying it and massaging it to make it fit a problem that I don't see exists at this point. I think we're better off to pass a bylaw, get something in place, make the changes that we want to see now, and then when issues come forward in the future, it can always be revised. If the number of 100 is too low, it can be revised. If a certain neighborhood is being overrun with short-term rental applications, then we can maybe take a look at allowing it in certain places, not other places. Traffic is a concern, parking is a concern. Maybe that's when we take a look at where they're allowed, where they're not allowed. To me, from what I see and the feedback I get from the community, that's not a concern at this point. That's why I won't support this. Thank you.
Christian?
Thank you through the chair. I would support this split, for a few different reasons. I don't feel the 100 limit, whatever that is a fleshed out number, but how I perceive the split to be in my mind is that removing that 100 cap would allow us to move ahead with the bylaw. And I see it, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but the second part of that motion then becoming a new layer of looking at what else can be done in the future. So it would be, the biggest complaints that I've heard is the non-compliancy, there's health and safety, all of those things. Without the cap, we're still able to move ahead with the higher fees, with all of that stuff, and move ahead without that limit at the moment. And that then we would be looking at the potential of The secondary piece being, do we want to now look at regulating short-term rentals through our land use bylaw and planning versus through the methodology that we're currently using? And I don't know if I'm totally off base, but I see it as almost bringing that back as an entirely separate layer of something that we can look at while we're still able to now do that enforcement side of things, which has been, in my experience, what most of the community's been worried about is the lack of enforcement and accountability for those people.
Nicholas? Nicholas?
Thank you, and through the chair to committee, I've heard some good points here, and I would agree with splitting the motion or not splitting the motion. I'm probably going to vote in favor of splitting the motion. I do want to see some options for managing non-principal short-term rentals through our land use bylaw and from a planning perspective. I'm not necessarily held up on holding back this bylaw to do that. I think it's important that we get the regulations out there, that we start enforcing our bylaw and ensuring that we have, again, that fire and life safety compliance through our business license process. But I do think that if we're going to come up with a cap, I think we need to justify why we would have that cap. And I think the easiest justification for a cap is we can grandfather in those short-term rentals, non-principal short-term rentals that are currently licensed and inspected or in the queue to be licensed and inspected. And we can hold off on approving new business licenses for non-principal short-term rentals until we can determine where they're most appropriate. Or if we do want to put a limit on how many we will have, we can dig into that a little bit further. But I am interested in getting this bylaw onto the books and start enforcing our licensing at a minimum. So thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Okay, so looking at that, if we're gonna remove the 100, we have 24 that we know right now that are licensed. We have a few in the queue. But these ones that we've already issued are all over the place. So if we go and then the second part is we go and then we make regulations around where they can be, does that mean those ones are grandfathered to, you know what I mean? And do we want to open up that second motion for only the 24 that are out there? We're gonna open up the LUB to change all these regulations if we're only allowing the ones that are there, and where are they right now? Right, they're all over different residential districts. So they wouldn't be in specific zones that we say that's where they can be. Do you know what
I heard, I'm speaking for the mayor, but I heard him answer that. He said that they would be grandfathered in. Am I correct, Nicholas?
Yeah, from my perspective, anyone that has a business license, when we pass the new bylaw, we're going to probably have to grandfather them through. I don't think that there's, if we remove the limit and we don't change our zoning and we just don't allow any more non-principal residences, then it's not an issue that we come up against. I think having that so grandfathering in those that are licensed today and then not issuing new licenses after this bylaw comes in outside of zones where it's permitted, I think is a reasonable path forward. Thank you.
I'm going to speak too. I'm in favor of splitting the motion. Because I'm not in favor of caps, because I think it does no harm into it, and we have no information to support the number or that it's even going to accomplish the objective that I think it's going to accomplish. Problem that I have is that coming back with options, more information from a planning perspective, I think that's too narrow. Like there's other approaches in other areas that I'm in favor of regulating short-term rentals. You know, I think the mayor's got a good point, safety and getting a business license and getting some basic rules down there like parking spots. I'm in favor of that. But I think there might be more than just a planning perspective that other areas that have done it. And we can bring back things. I'm I'm not sure that we fully explored what's going on in the Okanagan. We've had a whole summer of regulation, right? Anyways, did you have a comment?
Through the chair, so we have provided a report on pretty much all of the different available mechanisms that can regulate short-term rentals in a broader sense. Based on that report, we've decided on these pieces of regulation to move forward. We can also bring that back. We can, and we can also include some more specifics on the planning side, but we have had that broader conversation of the available levers for regulating short-term rentals back in August.
Yeah, okay, thanks. That was some holidays. Joanne, please.
Thank you, sir. So the reason I wanted this motion split is so that we can ask for comparables to come back to us. There are some municipalities who are out there proposing to make some pretty big moves as far as non-primary residents, and I think we should know what they're doing and possibly align ourselves with them. That's why I wanted this motion split, so we can get some comparables, see what others are doing.
Thank you. Kristen?
Thank you through the chair. I just want to see some clarity from the mayor on the first part of the motion, because I don't read in there that we are. The way I understand it is if we remove the 100 limit cap, it's not reading to me that we're limiting the cap at the time of the bylaw. And if that's the intent, that would change my vote as well, because I'm certainly not in favor of a 24 unit cap, certainly. So is it that we're removing the 100 limit cap, meaning there is no cap until we can come up with a proper review on the short-term rentals from a planning perspective, and then we would potentially either use the planning perspective as the mechanism to regulate, or we would reopen the bylaw to add a cap at a later date, which would be used as a mechanism to regulate. Because that's how I understood it, but if it's that we're freezing it the day that we pass the bylaw, then no, I do not support that.
Nicholas?
Thank you, and through the chair to committee. At this point, actually, the motion is just to sort of amend what the draft is in front of us. I fully expect that through conversation and further consensus, we would decide on what to do about a cap or no cap when we pass the actual wording of the bylaw. With this, I'm not sure if it's going to be council's intention to move this forward to the next meeting of council or to wait until we get a report back on some of these planning options. And I think that there's a couple of other things in this draft that we need to discuss, and there might be a couple of motions yet that will change some things. So at this point, no, I was just trying to move forward on some of the things that we've discussed, and it looked like the cap is a point that council needs to make a decision on, and I'd be, again, happy to accept amendments. If we split this motion on the cap, I would expect potentially an amendment on what that limit might be. And I'm, again, very, very much looking forward to hearing what council has to say on this issue, but I don't think that this motion finalizes anything, really. Thank you.
Chair, if I may, what might help answer that question? Charlene, can you pull up that original motion, please?
I think what this motion does is take away item A of the recommendation, and it still leaves item B. And then we either vote to go ahead with the bylaw with item B in it, which extends it to the external suites, and then we go on to the fine thing to see if we want to have larger fines or what we've got, and at least get more businesses regulated in that particular fashion. So it does move us along the path of council, depending on how council votes. That's what I think happens. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah.
Great. So any more comments or questions on this splitting the motion before we vote on it, please? So we're gonna vote on itself that we seek consensus to split the motion regarding the 100 unit cap. The administration bring back options on how to regulate non-principal short-term rentals from a planning perspective, and we'll vote on that. Please for or against, please. There's only six of us. Who didn't vote? Oh, Joanne. Joanne, can you vote? Did you vote?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Joanne voted. So that's 6-1, so now we're moving ahead. And we're going to discuss the first motion. Would that be appropriate? The first motion is whether or not we remove the cap of 100 or don't remove the cap of 100. Does anybody have any questions or comments related to that motion? So that that the committee seek consensus that administration remove the cap of 100 non-principal residents, and what that does is removes that from the original motion, and still leaves item B, which is the inclusion of external sectors. Any questions for that, please? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see, that's too small, too small there. Nicholas, please.
Oh, thank you, through the chair to committee. Again, I'm interested in hearing what committee has to say about the cap. I think that now that we've broken this out, I would be interested in hearing a conversation about whether we want to get rid of a cap altogether or we want to change that 100 number to something else. And my mind is open here. So let's have a discussion. Thank you.
All right, Trevor, while I was reading that. Okay, so don't say change it, it said remove it, but okay, please go ahead.
So my question, because this would result, I think we need a cap. I've already mentioned that. The question that comes up is the 100 reasonable? Is it accurate? Is it, we just pulled it from? So my question is to administration, what needs to happen at your end that it's not just a number we pick, but that would be sustainable for our community? Like what throws do you have to go through to figure out what that cap would look like to be justifiable in our community? Other than picking a number.
Through the chair to members of council. I don't think there's any data that we could compile that would say this is the right number. I think that this is based on council's vision for the community. You know, we know that by imposing a cap, let's say it's at 100, you open up 28 units, you know, but the question of is it enough or isn't, you know, without maybe doing a housing needs assessment and using that as part of justification. I don't know if there's really any data to say this is the right number, this is the wrong number for your community. I think you can have some supporting information that can help you with that decision. You know, through something like a housing needs assessment or things like that, but I don't know if there's going to be, there's no piece of data that is going to say this is the right number specific to short-term rental regulations.
Thank you. Okay. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, to committee, if committee recalls, the original recommendation from administration was 130, which was to accommodate the estimated number of non-principal short-term resident or short-term rental units that were out there currently listed on the market. The number 100 was picked and committee approved it because it was intended to incentivize people to get their STRs registered so they didn't miss the boat. I'm not tied to 100. It could be 130, it could be 150. I don't care. I need a number though, because without a cap number or some mechanism that prevents new purchases of new homes, new purchases of homes and converting them to STRs isn't solving the problem that we that we went out to solve in the first place. The reason that this ever came on my radar originally as a counselor is that I was getting concerns expressed to me from businesses and citizens in the community. From businesses, it was that I can't hire staff. Well, back up. It's not that I can't hire staff. I hire staff, and then when they're ready to come here, they can't find an affordable place to live or a place to live, period. Similar concerns from citizens. Family members, friends want to move to Hinton. They can't find affordable places. They can't find places to live. As long as there's no cap and it continues to be profitable to rent short-term rentals, people will continue to buy them and flip them into STRs. We can make the registration fee as high as we want, but as long as they're still profitable, it's going to continue to happen. And I get that people make the argument that it's good, we can see growth. I disagree. But that's a different discussion. I'm not gonna get into that at the moment, maybe later. The point is though, is if it's just free reign for as many short-term rentals to be opened in our community as possible, it doesn't solve the original problem of entry-level housing and conventional rentals being removed from the market and being put to STRs, thus making it not available for the people who need to live here because they work here. That's why I won't support anything unless there's some kind of cap or some kind of mechanism that doesn't just allow free reign to future STRs and non-principal residents.
Krista,
Thank you through the chair. I guess my biggest thing with the cap of 100 is that we just found out that we have 100. We could have had 100 for the last 5 years. We could be bobbing in that, like, we don't know that we would get 50 more people registering this year. We don't know that we had 50 people last year that opened them up for the first time. Like, that's not data that we have to say that this problem is escalating across the community. We just know what we have right now. And we don't know the ramifications of our licensing program and all of those other things that are going through. So that's why I have a problem with 100, because we really don't have the data to say this is the global scale, the provincial scale, all those things indicate that yes, short-term rentals is an increasing concern amongst communities for sure, but we don't actually know that for a fact. The other thing is that I struggle working in the housing industry because I don't see the connection with short-term rentals and affordable housing. Short-term rentals really impacts people buying entry-level housing, purchasing entry-level housing. I don't believe it has a moderate impact on maybe the basement suites and certain things like that. But it has more of an impact on the first-time home buyer, that entry-level house. It's that margin where they're buying, oh, I can get this condo, I can get this thing, I can do the rental, the short-term rentals thing. In my world, we haven't seen a ton of people saying, we need to evict you. I don't actually know that we've had any, that we need to evict you out of your long-term rental because we're turning it into an Airbnb or short-term rentals. It's a completely different clientele that are looking at the Airbnb world than that are looking at that long-term rental world for the most part. And yes, this is one mechanism in the housing scope that I do believe needs to be regulated and controlled. I 100% agree. But affordable housing and affordable rental housing is not closely linked to the discussion that we're having tonight, based on my experience. And I like I said, I am in favor of a cap. I do believe that that's somewhere we should get to, or some mechanism of controlling that amount, but I don't think we have the data currently to state that 100's right, or 200 is right, or 150 is right. And I don't think we've had the opportunity as council to go through the process, maybe in more of a strategic planning headspace where we determine what that looks like.
hold on. Yeah, I got a list.
Sure.
I got a list. Okay, what's next?
Yeah, I guess how I recall it in when we first brought this bylaw my recollection is that there has been quite an increase in short-term rentals. My recollection is at the time was about 75 in our community, which now we've learned has gone to 128, and that's within a year. Or how long has this bylaw been in place? Year or 2 years? 2 years? So
Yeah.
we have seen an increase and there's nothing stopping it. And that's why I'm definitely in favor of 100 or a cap. And I think the numbers do show, and the fact that we've also got a more, at that time, was a look at the websites and the platforms and what we could find. Things have gone, evolved from then. Now having this company get in there, I do think that it is growing. And I agree with Councillor Chambers. This is not, about affordable housing. I think of one of the things that I think of in our strategic plan, one of the things that we want to do as a community is retain our young people. Our young people, the younger generation, are not having the ability to have access to that first-time house buyers in our community. I keep a very close eye on our RLS and as soon as there is a very affordable first-time home buyer house, it is grabbed. And when I find then it's a short-term rental, that's my concern. I don't think it's gonna change our rentals, it's gonna change, but it's that, plus it's those people coming to work here, as Councillor Stashik says, that it is limiting their opportunities to purchase homes. These may not be families that are coming in looking for a 5-bedroom home, they're looking for a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom. Those are exactly what STRs seem to be primarily focused on, you know, and that's my concern. So if we don't cap it, I think it's gonna grow, it's gonna get bigger as tourism grows. I get it, and the fact that, I mean, just this evening, somebody out there listening to this and hears that I could buy a home and get 600 to 800 people coming through there at X amount of a night is it's an attraction, you know, in our community. That's a huge revenue boost that someone can invest in. So I'm concerned that this could blow up. And I'm okay with the 100 units. I think based on the past, that we've seen 75 to where we've now up to 128. I think it's reasonable. We pick a number, and I think that's a reasonable amount. It then shows people they have to comply. We're also gonna be making sure that we are on top of that with that system that we're gonna have in place with that company. So I'm not in favor of removing this whatsoever. I think that number is reasonable based on what we've been seeing. So, thank you.
No, I think that saying SDR affects housing without understanding the factors that are involved is maybe not the wisest thing. There are a variety of factors that are involved in a house on the SDR market that might make it suitable. There are things like the value of the house, whether it's high value, low value, vacancy rate, influx of people into the town that might make it pointless, that sort of thing. So because I'm in favor of growing the town and growing the tourism industry, and we've had problems with tight housing markets in the past, and we haven't had housing, we haven't had Airbnbs or short-term rentals. So this isn't a new situation that we've had. And I don't think that your assumptions are borne out with what's happening in other communities. Joanne.
Thank you, sir. So, 100 to me is a little high. 100 to me is high. 100 is 100 homes off the market. 100 is the people who are phoning me saying, I have family coming over from India. I have nowhere to put them. I don't know where to put them. Or people calling and saying, my apartment rent is going up. I have to leave. Where am I gonna go? So, you know, 100 to me is very high. And I gotta stress this again. To me, it is so important that we see what other municipalities are doing to handle this issue. We can say tonight, put a cap of 100 there, and then once we get that information back from you in doing the comparables, then we we could, make amendments to that 100 if we needed to. Is that right, Lorraine? If we said tonight, if we went with 100, and then we get comparable information back from you, which showed that the trend is moving downward,
When we would bring it forward.
we could get back and amend that, eh?
Okay, Albert.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor. I respectfully disagree with the assertion that short-term rentals aren't affecting the conventional rental market. I know it's anecdotal, and I know anecdotal is not the best evidence to base anything on, but I've been hearing for several years that the rental market in Hinton is being impacted. There's less and less units available for rent, and the ones that are available for rent are going higher and higher and higher. It doesn't take a big stretch of the imagination to draw a parallel between the fact that there's 130, 150 places listed on, just on Airbnb for short-term rentals in Hinton. It's not a big stretch to say, okay, if Airbnb wasn't a thing, a whole bunch of those would probably be available for conventional rental. I know people who have taken their conventional rentals off the conventional rental market and flipped them to Airbnbs because of the profit potential. So I know for a fact that that's happening. Yeah, I think they're all connected. It's all cascading. Rental increases, new home, entry-level home availability, all that stuff, it's all cascading. And there may not be any direct evidence that says that it's short-term rentals that are causing it, but I can guarantee short-term rentals aren't helping it. Anyway, just reiterating some more information. Right now, there's conventional rental availability in Hinton is virtually zero. It really is, honestly. If you talk to any of the property managers in Hinton, they'll tell you that there's some apartments available, and that's about it.
With that being the case, I think we've heard from virtually everybody. May I suggest that we head to the vote on this? Unless there's anybody,
Can I make an amendment to this, motion?
yes.
Okay, that committee seek consensus that administration cap non-principal residents at 50.
Please, Albert.
I have a question, I guess, for administration. Procedurally, is that an amendment? That kind of almost sounds like an.
Yeah, through the chair, I would say that the two are directly in opposition to each other, so.
Is it possible?
I suppose unless the amendment is, but that changes, I think, the material intent, because it would be to replace the 100 cap and place 50. But I think that changes the material intent of the motion, so.
Yeah,
I would vote on it, and then, depending on the results, I would probably make a new motion.
Perfect. So that, you can make another motion like that, Joanne, if you so desire. With that, let's call the vote to question, please. When we see it up on our.
Could I suggest an amendment to this before we move forward and vote on this?
All right.
Thank you. So, and I'll go to our CAO and the chair to make sure that this is okay, but I would like to amend the consensus on the floor. So it reads, the committee seek consensus that administration remove the cap of 100 non-principal residents short-term rentals and replace it with a cap of 50 non-principal short-term rentals. Would that work as an amendment, CAO Panasic and chair?
Through the chair, same comment as before. I think that would change the material intent of what we're talking about, because we're talking about removing it. So I would still recommend that we vote on this, and then if there's an alternative limit that we want to put forward through motion and debate, we could do that.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with that, if that's all right. If you'd like to make a recommendation on, 50 for a cap, you can follow that up with a motion. With that being the case, let's vote that, committee seek consensus that administration remove the cap of, 100 non-principal residents. Please vote for or against. Yeah, it's a tie, 3-3.
You know, I misunderstood totally misunderstood the motion.
You can ask for a revote.
Sure, let's, I'll allow a revote if there's, some misunderstanding. So let's clarify any misunderstanding. So this is to seek consensus that administration remove the cap of, 100 non-principal residents. To me, that means that if you vote for this, there is no cap at this point. Everybody clear? To vote for, that means you're removing the cap and there is no cap. If you vote against, that means that there is 100 cap. Is that what everybody understands? Oh, they have, would be good. Okay,
Actually, okay, so. Sorry. So if I want to remove the cap of 100 and make a different motion, I would be voting for,
correct.
right?
Then you can make another motion. Otherwise, we just voted for a cap of 100.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back and we'll redo that because there was a misunderstanding. Can we revote that, please? Unless somebody has an objection. Committee seek consensus that administration remove the cap of 100 non-principal residents. Please vote for or against. Okay, it's tied 3-3. So that means there is a cap of 100 non-principal residents. Is that what that means?
That's correct. The cap of 100 remains.
The cap of 100 remains.
Yeah, because the vote to remove it was defeated.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, now, that being the case, we move on to the, was there another part? Go ahead, please, Alex.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot there's another motion. Can I see clarity from administration though?
Please.
So to administration then, because the motion to remove it was defeated, that doesn't preclude an additional motion to have a new cap of a different number, does it?
No, there could be a new motion put forward on a different, for a different number, yeah.
Thank you.
Right, there was a second part to this, wasn't there? That's related to the planning. The second part we're gonna talk about now and vote on. We're in. Let's see, committee seek consensus that administration bring back options on how to regulate non-principal short-term rentals from a planning perspective. Comments or questions on that amendment? Nicholas? Then Joanne?
Thank you, through the chair to the rest of committee. So this is the second part of my motion. This piece, I would like to see options come back from a planning perspective within our land use bylaws. Currently, we have 9 residential zones. Looking at them through a cursory perspective, I believe that there are 2 zones that are absolutely appropriate for non-principal residents, short-term rental businesses. And to address something that Councillor Chambers mentioned, are short-term rentals properties being purchased up by investors to be operated as non-principal resident short-term rentals? There are entry-level homes in our community, and the majority of our entry-level homes are not in the zones that would be suitable for these kinds of businesses. And so looking at it from a land use planning perspective, we may be able to limit the number of entry-level homes being purchased up specifically for the purpose of running these businesses. And I think that there are some real options there, and I'd like to investigate it. That being said, if we brought this bylaw back to council at the next council meeting and were to pass it before getting some of these options back from administration, I think that would be a-okay, because the odds are we're going to have to amend this short-term rental bylaw sometime in the future as we hit reality and find out what really works and what really doesn't from an enforcement standpoint. So that's my perspective there, and thank you very much.
Howard?
Mr. Chair, Lee. I'm going to support this in principle, but I think I understand Mayor Nissen's intent. And the intent is that this comes forward, I need clarification from Mayor Nissen, that this comes forward at some point in the future. The intent isn't to get this information back from administration and use it to make an assessment or judgment for this amendment to the short-term rental bylaw. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councillor Ostashik. I'm interested in our options from land use planning perspectives, but I don't want to delay this bylaw in any way. And I recognize that we are going to have to discuss this bylaw again in the future, even if we were to pass it next week, because we're going into an enforcement cycle. And as administration tries to apply the bylaw, we'll find out what works and what doesn't, and we'll likely have to review it. Even from the perspective of a cap, potentially. So this is information I'd like to see come back to a future discussion, but not necessarily to delay the process that we're in right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, I appreciate that. I was quite sure that that was what your intent was. So I will support it in principle, despite what I said earlier. I think having this as a tool to better assess where these types of ventures are appropriate and where they wouldn't be appropriate in our communities, fine. Based on the understanding that it's not holding up the amendment to the bylaw that I'm hoping comes forward pretty quickly to council, because I think it's important that we get these amendments in place, because they're closing some of the gaps that are in the existing bylaw, and I think we need to do that. If I could ask the chair though for administration's input, how can that be captured in this motion so that there's a clear understanding that this doesn't form part of this section of bylaw amendments?
Through the chair to committee, yeah, I think all the people who would be working on this are around the table right now. So as long as that's the understanding that we're looking at these from two different areas, I think we're fine.
Thank you,
Just saying.
Mr. Chair.
Just to clarify, we pass this, to my mind, we then go to the short-term rental original amendment 1161. That has an A and a B, and that's what we're going to. In the meantime, you guys are bringing back a report on this.
That's correct.
That's what I
In the
think.
future.
Okay, Chris.
Through the chair, if I may, would it be appropriate to say, to bring back options to a future committee meeting? Just to clarify the intent that it would come back to another meeting of ours. And then it wouldn't be part of that bylaw. I don't know if that is appropriate. If I need to make a motion to amend, or if that's a friendly amendment, I'm not sure how that works.
Through the chair, if there's no opposition to
Is there
that, I
an
don't think
opposition to
that
that
changes.
amendment? Okay, can you please add those words if there's no opposition? Nicholas?
No opposition to that. To a future committee of the whole is absolutely fine.
Can you just add those words?
Yeah.
Thanks. Right, any comments or, oh, sorry, Joanne.
So I know we're only allowed 2 amendments per motion, so would I wait for us to vote on this and then get my amendment in there? Because it's really important to me that we get municipal comparators in this motion.
Yeah, let Jordan answer that.
Through the chair, I think that would be likely better suited as a separate motion. If you'd like to put that forward after.
Right, no more questions or comments, can we seek a vote on, this one, please? Okay, we're going for or against, the committee seek consensus that administration bring back options on how to regulate, non-principal short-term rentals from a planning perspective, to a future committee of the whole. Please vote for or against, thank you. Okay, that passes 5-1. Now we'll move on to, we'll either move on, I think, we'll move on to the main motion unless Joanne has a,
Yeah, I do have a motion.
and that's an amendment to the original motion.
No, you said not to make an amendment, hey, to make a run.
Sorry, is there a motion on the floor right
Joanne
now?
wants to make a motion that,
Yeah.
that we seek, outside information on, the planning, the planning.
Yeah, and I don't believe there was any motions on the floor, so I believe you can simply make that motion.
Okay. All right. The committee directs administration to, bring back, I might need help with this, to bring back a report on municipal comparators in regards to short-term rentals or non-primary residents.
No, non-principal SCRs, I think is what she means.
And the regulations at the end, I believe.
Wait a second, is that what you, want?
The committee directs administration to bring back a report on municipal comparators. And I can't see the rest.
On municipal comparators on non-principal short-term rentals and regulations.
Yeah.
Trevor?
So I just have a clarifying question, because the fact that you wanted to add, or that there was to add to the last one, my question is, this is asking for a separate report. My question is, based on the previous, motion, would administration be looking at comparators when they're looking into planning? So instead of saying a report, but to include or something that municipal comparators are brought into that, because I don't want administration to go off and make a report on only that. And because it seems like that's something administration already probably would be doing anyway, is to look at from a planning perspective, but I'm looking for administration's input.
Through the chair to members of council, I read this to say, before we vote on the bylaw, the short-term rental bylaw, that we want to look at, a municipal comparative report that would look at all the regulations and what other comparable municipalities have done. I don't, just the way it's worded, it's not specific for planning regulations, so I would say that this would likely be developed and brought forward prior to voting on the bylaw. At least that's my interpretation.
So I guess my question to, if I may, thank you for that, because I just thought, because we wanted to add it to an amendment to that previous one. Is that what, Councilor Reese, is that your intent, that would, is what you're looking for?
In the previous motion, I tried very hard to get this wording into the previous motion,
Right.
but I wasn't able to. So I just can't stress how important it is to get that information from other municipalities who are going through this and are working on bylaws right now.
All right.
Thank you. to committee. If I could just have clarification, because this is very broad to me. I believe you were looking at the cap itself and as well, looking to see what other municipalities are doing around capping them, because now this to me is very broad in a sense. What am I actually comparing? Everything? Like, that's what I'd like to know, because that's a lot of, yeah, I need clarification.
Through the chair, I think it's okay to leave it broadly to look at all the regulations that some have done, but I guess the clarification is, to Councillor Races, are we looking at, we want a comparable or a comparison report for other municipalities specifically for the planning regulations, or are we looking for the entire, the short-term rental bylaw and taking a step back and looking at what options are available for regulating short-term rentals and what others have done? Because it'll dictate the timing of when this bylaw comes forward. If it's for planning, we would bring that forward alongside that planning report that would come after likely this bylaw is debated and the readings provided. If it's for the entire, for all regulations related to short-term rentals, then that would likely come at a future committee of the whole prior to this bylaw that we're talking about today going to.
Oh, please.
Thank you, sir. So just, Lorraine, just to add to that, so information on the fines that other municipalities are wanting to administer, the cap of how many. It's, I think it's very broad information.
And sorry, if I may, Chair, through the committee, are we just looking at non-principal residents in this research?
To me,
Like
that is my biggest concern.
Nicholas?
Thank you, and through the chair to committee, I would support this motion, but again, like the last motion we did, I'd be interested in seeing this come back at a review rather than having this report delay the development of our bylaw and the passing of our short-term rentals bylaw. And to add some background to it, it's actually the situation in Canmore. Canmore has chosen to do their short-term rental regulations through their land use planning, and they've added a vacation home zone to their land use planning bylaw in order to regulate these kinds of things. And Canmore is a very different situation from us. They're far ahead of us in terms of having to deal with the short-term rental issue and the effect that it has on housing in their community. But it's some really interesting policies that they've taken on that land use planning side to try and combat some of the problems that they're having with these short-term rentals. And I would really like to see that sort of planning information included in the report on our municipal comparators, because there are communities that are doing things that are effective, and there's communities that are doing things that are ineffective. And as we go to review the results of our bylaw, having that information, I think, will be very useful to us. Thank you.
Yeah, so with that, as it's worded, I won't be in favor of it because it potentially could delay. I'm in favor of it being included into the future report as to the planning, as the mayor had mentioned. But I don't want to delay this bylaw, the parts of it already, and this is diving right into it. I think that we could have had that then when we looked at it the very first time. So the way it's worded, I'm not going to support it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I need some clarification. The question's been asked 2-3 times about whether the intent is this is an independent report that we get before the bylaw amendments come to regular, or if this is supposed to be an addendum to the report for the motion that we just passed. And I need clarification for that, because if it's an addendum to the motion that just passed, perfect, I'll support it. If it's going to be a report that comes back to us before the amendments to the STR come to regular, I won't support it. So I need clarification on that.
And I would like to say it is in support of what the motion that we just passed. And Councillor, you have better wording. I'd certainly would wanna see it out there so that you would support this.
If I could follow up,
Yeah, please.
to support this, then I need wording in the motion that reflects that, please.
Yeah, well, I would say that if you're gonna do what Albert want, or what I was suggesting, then the wording would be something related to throwing in planning there. Because wasn't the last motion related to planning, bylaws and something, so that this is collecting more information regarding, I don't know, the planning bylaws.
I would take any help I could get.
I don't have the, sure.
Yeah, so if I would like to see it say, bring to be include. Committee seek direct administration to include. Municipal comparators. On short-term rentals and regulations. And then it would be into the last motion, to include in that motion, basically, so it would be whatever Charlene had said about, the planning.
Related to a planning perspective.
Yeah, related to the planning perspective.
So, is there any objection to us adding those words in? It's a motion of council, Albert?
Yes.
I have no objection as long as administration has a clear understanding that we don't want to delay the amendments to the bylaw coming to regular, that this is intended to be part of the other report that's coming to us regarding land use and planning.
The future.
Okay,
Through the chair, that's understood.
then good, then thank you, Mr. Chair.
So the planning. Sorry, I saw the wording before, whatever that
From a
was.
planning perspective, I
Yeah.
believe were the words that we wanted to add.
Yeah.
Those were the words that we used in the previous motion, I believe. Is that close enough?
That works. That works.
Thank you. Right, any comments or questions on this? Oh, the mayor, excellent. Nicholas?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I support it as amended here. Thank you.
All right, yeah, no, I support this too. As was previously stated, actually in this meeting, we don't know what works and what doesn't work, and making decisions based on that, so getting information seems to, make sense. Any more questions or comments before we vote on this? Okay, let's have this up to vote, please. That committee direct administration of include municipal comparators on non-principal short-term rentals and regulations from a planning perspective. Please vote for or against. We're missing one. Do we have 6? Okay, that passed unanimous. Now, Albert, please.
Mr. Chair.
Well, we have a bathroom
We're
break.
not getting a wish.
We have to have a bathroom break soon. Just saying.
I would like to move the committee direct administration. Remember section 4.0. To read a top of 130. License, non-principal, and then the rest of 4.0 is the same. Just changing the number to 100 to 130.
Ask administration, are we allowed to do that with the previous motion? Is that, something that fits?
You are, yeah. The reason that I advised against voting is because the initial motion was to remove the cap altogether. And then amendment to try and bring one back. This one is as a separate motion to change the cap from 100 to 130 is fine.
Okay, fine. Questions or comments on, please go ahead.
I'd like to speak to it,
Sure.
please. Whatever number we wind up picking, if we want a cap, it's going to be somewhat arbitrary. We kind of landed on 100 before because it was supposed to incentivize people who've got existing STRs to step up to the plate and get their STRs registered if they're not. My intent was never to penalize anybody who's already got an operating STR and robbing them of the ability to be able to do that. So this, with a number of 130, allows anybody who's got one existing right now, as long as they beat the gold rush of the new ones that are going to be coming in like crazy, they can get their existing STR registered and fall underneath the cap. I think it's a good compromise between having a cap in place and allowing everybody that's currently got an STR to be able to be compliant and continue to keep their STR. It also allows at any point in the future, if it's the will of council, to open this back up again and make future amendments to raise that number or lower that number for what's appropriate in the day. It's perfectly fine to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to ask you a clarifying question.
Mhm.
How do we know whether they have a SDR or not? If they're not right, if they don't have a business license? Just the fact, how would we determine that? Somebody saying, well, I have one, I just haven't put it up yet.
So the information that we got from administration based on the numbers that they have, I forget what the math was, but it's the total number that are listed minus the ones that are registered, minus the ones that are known to be in primary residences left balance, and I think it was like 128 or something.
That's correct, yes.
That's the number. So it would be.
So 130 should accommodate all those existing ones according to the information that administration got to us.
So this would be the number of SDRs listed as for the August 27th report that we had.
And non-principal
Which is 120,
residents.
1.7.
That's my understanding, yes.
Any questions or comments? Trevor?
I'll be in favor of this. It's a cap and it can be reopened. And then it gives us some control of how many, and then it also from an enforcement perspective, because these, any non-principals that show up on a short-term rental, hence why we're, getting the contractor to keep an eye on things, then we can then, be more on top of the enforcement of it. So I think it gives us an opportunity to have some control over that, absolutely. So I'll be in favor of the 130, accommodates everyone that has, and I agree. I think the one thing we heard the most that I saw was on the cap. They're not necessarily, the comments we got were not in favor of the enforcement of it and the fines of it so much. I mean, there was maybe one or two, but not so much. What was that cap? So this is accommodating those that already have and then keeping it limited to that. So, yeah, I'll be in favor.
Great, any more comments or questions before we go to the vote? Okay, can we see that up to the vote, please? Okay, we're gonna vote, yes, for or against the administration, the committee of director administration to amend section 4. To read a cap of 130 licensed non-principal, principal short-term rentals will be permitted. Please vote for or against. Thank you. Okay, that doesn't pass, so that means we're back to 100. Okay, thank you. Now we'll go back, I think we're back to the original report, which was that, I think we're looking at that, committee directs administration to bring short-term rental bylaw number 11621 to a future meeting of council as presented. And this one then would include the cap of 100, and it would include the inclusion of external secondary suites eligible for SDRs. So that if we if somebody wants to put that motion forward, then this comes back to a regular meeting of council with those, guidelines in it. Trevor?
Thank you for that clarification. I'd like to move the recommended motion, the committee directs administration to bring the short-term rentals bylaw amendment number 1162 -1 to a future regular meeting of council as presented. And as you already indicated, we made no amendments to it. It's the same. So we just added that other motion. So I have nothing to say further on this.
Thank you for that. Nicholas, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, a question for administration. In the redlined draft of the bylaw, under section 6, we've got item Oscar. It was worded when we were presented with this last time in committee incorrectly. And as I read it today, it still reads incorrectly that shall not offer temporary accommodations or permit a guest to sleep in a room where the suite at least has one outside window or exterior. It needs where the room does not at least have. It was my understanding that administration was going to fix that wording before bringing it back. Hasn't happened. Do we need a motion to get administration to fix that before it comes back? Or can we approve this motion that's on the floor and have that wording fixed for the time it comes back to council? Thank you.
Board, please, or administration?
Through the chair, I believe it's, sorry if I could just have a few seconds to review this section.
Perfect, okay.
That makes sense to me.
Through the chair, I think if you read the entire section, I think it's, I believe it's, it is correct. Shall not offer temporary accommodation or permit a guest to sleep in a room where the suite at least has one outside window or exterior door openable from the inside without the use of keys, tools, or special knowledge to provide the exit in the event of an emergency, except where the suite is equipped with a sprinkler system. So I think that we're saying that it's with one outside window or exterior door that is openable from the inside without the use of keys. And that's, when you look at the full section, I believe is correct.
The first word shall not offer temporary accommodation or permit a guest to sleep in a room where the suite has a window or an exterior door operable from the outside. It's the negative of what we're trying to say. It's the negation.
Oh, my mistake. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Okay.
comment to that? if I may?
Oh, please.
Thank you, Chair, to committee. That also is a requirement that the exit window size has to meet Alberta Building Code. If it's a house that was built in the 50s or 60s, has a small window and doesn't facilitate an escape, it's not permitted to be utilized as a bedroom.
Sure, that would show up in the inspection. Jordan, you're still with the original question is there a change to be made, and can you make that change without us making a motion?
Through the chair, we can make any necessary changes. This is a housekeeping item.
Okay, do you accept that, Nicholas?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the motion of, that, I believe we're on to, any more questions or comments that the community directs administration bring short-term rental bylaw amendment number 11621 to a future regular meeting of council as presented. Any more questions or comments? If that, we'll vote for or against, please. And we're missing a vote. Okay, so that passes 4-2. Thank you. Is there any more business related to the short-term rental bylaw amendment number 11621 before we move on to a 5-minute break? No, with that, I'd like to declare a 5-minute break. My recommendation is try to get through the business license bylaw, because that's directly related to what we've been talking about. And then see where we stand collectively as to whether or not we want to continue the rest of the meeting. The town manager does tell me that the rest of the agenda items are, what was the term you used?
They would be helpful in developing a budget.
Right, could be delayed. Thank you. That's what terms you used. Let's move on to the business license bylaw. Thank you. Administration?
I will turn this over to, I believe this is Lorraine as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair, through to the committee. This will follow the short-term rental bylaw that we just dealt with regards to looking to increase the fines in our business license bylaw. And this comes again back from our August 27th council meeting or committee meeting, where it was looked at to increase fines for, again, the non-principal residents only that are operating without a valid business license. We found that the rates for fines in our current bylaw were fairly low in comparison to what you are charged to get a business license for a non-principal resident. And what I mean by that is a non-principal residence is $1,500 to obtain a business license. However, if you don't obtain your business license, your fine is only $250. And that's your first fine, of course, but with that, we found that it's not an aggressive enough or strong enough amount to encourage people to come in and get licensed. So we thought that we would look at increasing, and as you can see, again, we will be removing the fee schedule that's currently under the business license bylaw, and then we will be moving these fees into this all-encompassing fees, rates, and charges bylaw that will be coming to you guys, and it's attached for your review. So in this bylaw, we're referring to the new fees, rates, and charges bylaw with regards to any fees. And what we will be doing is we will be increasing the fines from starting at $250 first offense, $500 second offense, and let me just, and $750 for third. And we'll be increasing those. Sorry, I'm just getting my form here right now. We'll be increasing those to $2,000 first offense, $2,500 second offense, and $3,000 for your third and subsequent offense. And that's what we're recommending this evening to committee, is that we bring this back to a regular meeting, providing that we will increase those fees in the fees, fees and charges bylaw, the new one. 2,000 and 1,000 more. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, any questions or possibly a motion on the business license bylaw, Trevor?
Yeah, I'd like to move the committee direct administration to bring the business law license bylaw amendment number 1126-3 to the next regular meeting of council of October 15th, 2024 as presented. I agree with these. I do have a question though in regards to the fees or penalties. With the 22,000 to start, 2,500 and then 3,000. What kind of time frame is given between the 2,000, the 2,500, and then the 2,500 and the 3,000? What is the best practice, or what do we practice?
Through the chair to members of council, the discretion rests with the bylaw officer, and it's going to depend on the particular situation. But typically for something like this, the goal is not to, we're not trying to get revenue from this process. The goal here is that we want to meet compliance with the regulations. So, you know, I would say that typically we would probably look at about a 60-day, a 60-day before we start looking at subsequent fines. Now, the situation each time may be a little bit different, but generally, I think that the goal is to be reasonable in the circumstance.
Let me follow up, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that. I guess that would then potentially change to say if it's passed with a cap and it's a non-principal that's over the cap, would that change that 60 days or whatever? Like that discretion would then change because there's no way that they would even be able to or valid to have one, right? So those things would change, because that's a big part of what this is all about. Is the safety is one thing, but also then managing how many more are out there that are being used that's outside of that cap.
Through the chair, it may, but you know, if somebody's operating a short-term rental and and we come in and we say, you're not authorized to have a short-term rental, and in fact, we've met the cap, you can go on this waiting list, here's your fine. I don't think, even looking at kind of 60 days is again, a rule of thumb as being reasonable, probably is, still valid, maybe in certain situations where somebody is a little bit less willing to comply with the regulations, but typically you're looking at again, the goal is to reach compliance, and it does take time for somebody to take those things down, get them off the platform. So I think that 60 days again would be a general rule of thumb.
Okay, thank you.
Howard?
Mr. Chair, I'm not in support of the motion. I think throughout the whole process regarding this bylaw, council's proven that their council's willing to take a balanced approach to short-term rentals in our community, provided that those short-term rentals are complying with reasonable guidelines and regulations. I think based on the amount of feedback that we've gotten from the community, this is an important thing to the citizens in our community. So it needs to be taken seriously. And I think one of the ways to make sure that it is taken seriously is to ensure that the fines are at this level. $250, $500. If you're making significant profits on an SPR, you running really unlicensed SPR for some time before that's very impactful. These fines though, they would have to be taken seriously if they're letting up somebody who's operating an unlicensed SPR. That's why I'm in support. Thank you.
Kristen?
I'll be speaking in support. I did just have one question though. Is there not a benefit to having some consistency potentially in the way that these fines are if that's the right word? Because while I understand the discretionary part, and I certainly don't think it should be a revenue generator, I totally agree with that. I would hate to be answering the question of why that guy was given 6 months to be compliant and this guy was given 3 months to be compliant, and that guy, the variables, I think we're taking a pretty strong stand, and I think that's what we want to do. But is there not a mechanism where we would say, okay, you get your first fine, you now have 30 days, I'm just making things up. You have 30 days to make your application to the town, do whatever. Once you've done these things, we're gonna give you that grace period. If it's a wait list, we're gonna give you, whatever. And then if you haven't done that, then that second fine would come in within that 30 days. The third fine in that 30 days, but it's a kind of a 3-month program. I would be interested to see what the impact, I don't know what that looks like, but the discretionary piece of this could get really, really weird. Depending on the situation. So and I don't know where if that's a conversation even for this right now, if I'm barking up the wrong tree, but I guess that's just my question is I worry that, we're making a big stand, it's gonna be public, people are gonna be talking about it, and if they're not being treated within that same timeframe and timeline, I think that could pose issues.
Through the chair and members of council, that practice has been, that is the standard municipal practice generally. Some municipalities have taken very hard stances on saying every day that you're not compliant, and they do that through bylaw. The general practice for municipalities is to have some discretion, because once that's put into policy, that's what it is. And, and you will get situations of working with people, oh, I'm in Bermuda, I'll be back I'll be back next month and I'll come in, I'll get compliant, or they're working towards compliant and for certain regulatory issues that get hung up, the discretion and planning does this. This is common practice when it comes to planning. If you work with people, you try to get them compliant. And as long as they're making meaningful steps towards that compliance, typically, we try to work with people. If it's 30 days, it's 30 days and there's no wiggle room. So the general practice for municipalities, for really all bylaws, is to incorporate that discretion within the bylaw by not specifying it. But like I said, typically when you specify it's for, making it stricter than what, we would typically do as administration, like a daily rate. Something along those lines is what that would be common.
Nicholas?
Thank you, and through the chair to committee. I'm in support of the increased fines, and I certainly don't want to make any changes that are going to delay this process today. But I do think that going forward, we may, when we revise this or look at it again, we may choose to make the fines or the penalties for not obtaining a business license for short-term rentals flat across for both principal and non-principal residents. The reality is our business license process is a fire safety process. We need to do those fire inspections to make sure that these properties are safe. And I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that we're going to give 60 days between penalties. I am concerned about an unlicensed operator who has not had an inspection getting caught and then having continual 60-day periods to maintain non-compliance. The reality is these fines, while they look steep for operators over the summer months in Hinton, these fines aren't that significant, and I am concerned about those fire inspections. So as we revisit this going forward, I'll be interested in seeing how this bylaw works, how our enforcement goes, and hearing any ideas that we can do to ensure that the fire inspections at a minimum are being done quickly and early when we find these unlicensed properties. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So if we have someone who is 60 days delinquent on their first fine, is that attached as a line item to their taxes?
Through the chair, no, it's there's the process in order to put legal amounts owing onto your tax roll. There's a whole process through the MGA, so that doesn't happen immediately. That's that's a process that you have to go through. But so for one delinquent fine, even 2 and 3 likely wouldn't be placed on their tax roll until the municipality is determined that that's a necessary step and go through the legislative process.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Please.
There are some complicating issues that may need to be considered here in determining these fines. Typically, when a fine is given for a failure to have a business license, a fine is issued for every day that they're not in compliance. This would be an unreasonable expectation in this case, because a lot of the non-principal owners of these short-term rentals are not residents, and they're not accessible to give a fine to serve them with a fine. So we would have to contact them and either by registered mail or however we do it, and give them a time frame to rectify the situation. But it would also, it would have to be accompanied with a cease and desist order so that they can't continue to operate once they've received that notice and that fine from us. And then a time frame for them to rectify the situation, get their business license, get their inspections done, and become compliant. And then if they don't do it in the specified time frame, be that 30 days or 60 days, whatever is determined by council to be the appropriate time frame, then they are served with a secondary and increased fine. And those fines should not be forgiven. If they've been non-compliant, they are required to pay those fines before they obtain a business license.
Over.
Mr. Chair, So then that process Director DeBoja was talking about, does that form part of the bylaw, or does that have to be the motion of council or committee, or how does that work?
Through the chair, I believe we're talking about the procedure. And that comes along with, stopping, but I don't think that's a procedural issue.
Purely administrative, then
Yes.
council doesn't need to be involved?
That's correct.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't support the increased fines. I mean, I do support business license fee, and I do support the increased fines. I don't support these increased fines because they use as a starting point the $1,500, which as opposed to 165 for a business license for everybody else. And I regard that as unfair to the people who invested in this community. And I think the other reason why we went to the 1,500 was something related to competition between the SDR and the hotels. It seems to me to be the reason why we went to the 1,500. And I don't think that's an area that the town should be getting involved in, is trying to readdress competition inequities between businesses any more than we would between pizza joints and burger joints. So, any more comments or questions? Oh,
Yeah, I just have a question then here regarding your statement. Or you may have missed it, we're not amending the business license fee, are we? Just the penalties for
Correct.
non-compliance, correct?
Correct, that's it. For the non-principals, the non-compliance, not for the principal residence ones.
Right, and it's just the fines for
Just the
non-compliance.
fine, yeah, not the fee
understood.
application.
Okay, with that, let's have the motion up to vote on. Oh, the mayor has a question.
No, that's my hand's up by accident. Sorry.
Oh, excellent. Okay. The committee direct administration to bring the business license bylaw amendment number 1163 to the next regular meeting on October 15th, 2024 as presented. So that's basically voting to increase the fines. If you vote for, you increase the fines. If you vote against, you don't increase the fines. Okay, please vote for or against. You can vote for either. Right, okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 5 voted for and 1 voted against. That might conclude the discussion on short-term rentals and the business license bylaw. Does anybody have any more questions or comments that they'd like to address, or business that they'd like to address from the topic? No. Okay, well, that being the case, we could do one of two things. We could move on into the meeting. Or the town manager has already told me that the rest of the topics are, what was the term? Can be delayed.
Can be delayed, yes.
Can be delayed.
Yeah, we
So
can
if
find a time.
As could our in-camera discussion. So I would look forward to a motion to conclude the meeting if anybody wanted, or we can continue.
I'd like to move the committee the rest of the agenda items on tonight's agenda to a future committee meeting. Actually, just to a future meeting, council.
Okay, any comments for or against that?
Yeah.
I can speak to that. I believe that after about 3.5 hours to 4 hours, we don't make the same decisions or have the same level of discussion as we do earlier on in the evening. It just isn't productive. Or not giving the due attention to topics that we should be giving. No, I do in favor.
I am too in favor of this. These are too important to continue on, and it is getting late. My question to administration though, because during the break, I heard like scheduling is you know, we don't have a lot of time before we start the budget deliberations, and there are a couple of these, or most of them that have a budgetary, so I'm not saying I'm not making a motion, but I'm just putting it out there that, you know, this is the time of year that if we need a special meeting in council to cover some of these things before, I think that that's something to consider as well. Because we do have the organizational meeting, which is gonna take up a lot of time, plus we have a lot of presentations coming our way as well. So that's just throwing it out there that we're in that season where we got a lot to get through and the budget is top of the list.
Was there a question there?
Nope, just a comment, so.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, let's see the motion up here, please. That committee postpone the remaining agenda to the future committee meeting of the whole. Albert, Mr. Chair.
Just the only change, with, meeting with council. And then that way, agenda planning administration can decide whether it's appropriate to come back to committee of the whole. Or regular meeting.
We haven't discussed it, so you're.
That was the motion they made actually.
Yeah, that's
Just
what I was-
after they directly.
Oh, well, it's even better. Make sure you get it right this time.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Future meeting.
Don't tell us.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Meeting with council.
What happened? So on, doing one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, any discussion or comments on that? Let's see that after the vote. Okay, please vote for or against. Okay, that clears the rest of the topics off the agenda. Does anybody want to put forward a motion to adjourn? Please.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn at 7:49 PM.
Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions on that? My only question, you want to still get on pizza?
No. Yeah, go till 8 to get pizza.
All right. Okay, that means we're in the meeting for 7:49 PM. Vote for it, thank you. Now there's no in camera tonight, that to be delayed. Unless there's an objection.